What's good? I'm Kinell, and this is Sinister Cinema, where we get deep into the guts of the stranger side of cinema. Just letting you know with this little bit at the start that we now have a Patreon. Sub up to that and you can get all these episodes early and ad-free, so you won't even see this bit at the start. You get them a few days before the main episodes drop out. We've got some great guests coming up. We've got some studio episodes. We've got some Zoom episodes with some fantastic rappers talking about the films they love and the films that influenced them. We got a lot going on there. Plus, you get some bonus content like film reviews, all that kind of thing. I don't need to explain this to you. You know what a Patreon is. But yeah, it's patreon.com/Kinell Sinister Cinema. So check that out. Peace. Yes, people. What's good? I'm Kinell, and this is Sinister Cinema, where we get deep into the guts of the stranger side of cinema. Kinell Sinister Cinema is brought to you by Forgotten Sons Apparel. Check them out at forgottensonsapparel.co.uk. Forgotten Sons Apparel is a York-based streetwear brand drawing inspiration from alternative culture, tattoos, film, classic TV and cartoons from our childhood. In our own words, if you like our stuff half as much as we do, then we like it twice as much as you. I'm a big fan of this brand and I love the guys who make it. They've supported me for years, way before I was podcasting. They supported me in my battle rap career. You might have seen me rocking some of their garms on Don't Flop and other leagues. I love Forgotten Sons Apparel and I'm urging you all to check them out at forgottensonsapparel.co.uk. Right, now on with the show. Hey yo, it is once again the KSC podcast, Kinell's Sinister Cinema. I am Kinell, but you know that already because you're here. We're going to get straight into it today. I've got a fantastic guest for you from Ghouls Magazine, who you might have also seen her work on Heroes Scream and the Moving Pictures Film Club. It's Ariel.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, it's happening. You good?
Yeah. What about you?
Always around these parts.
Good.
Apart from the fact I did a load of takes of the intro and it didn't work. But one of the main reasons why the intro didn't work is because today we're going to be talking about the sort of 2000s torture porn movement.
Yes.
And I was trying to describe it and I couldn't really think of a good definition, really. Have you got one?
Well, I kind of have one. So it definitely is a period of time in the early 2000s. And I tend to think of torture porn more as the English language, violent, nasty movies that came out of that time. So I don't lump in New French Extremity. I think that's its own thing, and I'm not an expert on that. And I don't really lump in like the Japanese gore wave that was going on at the same time too. I think those were different cultural movements that were happening. But particularly North American and Australian films, and certainly from other places in the world too, we're going through this time of really sort of scuzzy, nasty, violent filmmaking, which I love. And I think something that sets it apart from like New French Extremity or even from extreme cinema is that a lot of times torture porn doesn't necessarily always have a message. It can. But, you know, I think of Martyrs and I think of the way Martyrs leaves you feeling is really emotional at the end of it. But, you know, Hostel 2 doesn't leave me feeling that way in the same way, but I'd rather watch Hostel 2. So anyway, now I'm just getting away from your question and trying to give it a definition. But I think those are some of the things that make what gets lumped into torture porn.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's weird because the actual term torture porn, that's not something that people who make the films turn up with. That was something leveled at it as a criticism, really.
Yes.
It's quite a dismissive term that just got adopted.
It can be. Yeah. I think, you know, I don't use it in a negative way, but it certainly isn't a positive term. And like you said, it was something that critics came up with, particularly after Hostel. Torture porn kind of became the term at that point, and even some movies that came out before that, like House of a Thousand Corpses, got lumped into it. And I know Eli Roth in particular really rejects that term, and he says if people call his movies that, they don't understand his movies. And I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true. Like, we have to call them something, and that's what they got called.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Like, because I mean, if you actually analyze the content of it, I mean, like there are films that exist that are actually like the porn of torture, like the guinea
Right.
pig series, and these are just like they're banging horror films, like. And it is like a sort of like subgenre and a movement that like does get looked down upon by even people who wouldn't look on or who wouldn't look down on other things like the new French extremity movement you mentioned earlier. That's looked at very academically, and like people have that kind of spin on it. Whereas like high tension, for example, is like what do you call it? It's lumped in with these like classic, very arty films, like,
Yeah.
and it's because they're speaking French, innit? Because as soon as Alexander Aja comes over to America and makes The Hills Have Eyes, he's a torture porn guy.
Exactly. Yeah, that could be part of it, because the people who were labeling things torture porn were not French, as far as I know. So it could be that we just sort of view that through a lens of, oh, we can't take the art away from this, which I think is partly what the new French extremity movement was responding to, which again, I'm not an expert on. It's just not, I've spent a lot more time in the scuzzy, nasty torture porn zone than I have in the new French extremity zone. And, I think, like you said, people really like to kind of punch down on it, even other horror fans. How many times have you heard the exact phrase, like, oh yeah, I'm a horror fan, but not all that torture porn stuff? Like,
Exact phrase.
I've heard that exact phrase so many times, and I usually respond like, oh, well, I do. And, I don't say that to like be argumentative, but just to let people know that like, that's okay to like around me. I'm not going to judge you for liking it, but I do kind of wonder why it is. Like, why has it become a thing that's okay to just openly hate more so than any other subgenre,
Yeah, for people like I've literally like since we booked this in, I've been like sort of coming up with theories about it. Like, I've got a couple. Could I hit you with the first one?
Yes, please.
Yeah, my theory is that like it's because because of the likes of Eli Roth and Rob Zombie. These are people who were like who like made these films. Like I'd say, House of the Thousands of Corpses is maybe proto torture porn, but by the
Yeah.
time we get to Devil's Rejects, that's torture porn.
Yep.
And I think it's because like they were like known sort of celebrities almost. They were known behind the camera. And I think sometimes people just need a guy to hate. It's like he says in Scarface, you need guys like me so you can point at them and say, that's the bad guy. And like my theory is it's like a Martin Shkreli effect. Like the pharmaceutical industry does all these terrible things, but as soon and like no one says anything. But as soon as there's one guy who's on social media and he looks a bit of a preppy dick and all this, everyone's pointing at him saying, fuck you. But he's only doing the same thing that everyone else in his industry that doesn't get the criticism gets. So
That's a really good point. And guys like Rob Zombie and Eli Roth, they're not quiet. And it's not like they should be, but they're really sort of easy to hate because they're so out front of their art and so defending their art. And like, I don't know who they are as people. I don't know these guys, but like they say a lot of things that come off controversially, and especially Eli Roth has said some stuff in the past that's just awful. But I do think it makes it easy for people to go, oh yeah, I hate you and your movies. Whereas if they were like, we all thought they were the best guys in the world, would people be reacting differently to the exact same movies? I don't know. That's a good theory.
it is like, because I mean, like that exact phrase you said, you've summed it up so well with that. Oh, I like horror movies, but not some of that torture porn stuff. I've heard people say that. Then they'll say they're in some really fucked up shit, but it's fucked up shit from the 80s, or or it's like fucked up shit that's more of an art house thing. And even that's it. There seems to be these justifications, because it's worth recognizing that these films, a lot of them are House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects. I'd say like what I consider year zero for actual torture porn is probably the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake and Hostel and that. the
Mm-hmm.
thing to realize is that these were like very successful films. These were playing in multiplexes.
Right. People were going to see them. They were eating them up. And I kind of wonder now, like, where have those people gone? Like, did they like the films at the time? Did they not like them? Have they moved on to some other kind of films? Because I think about like that time, especially in, I'm American, obviously, you can tell from my
Mm.
horrible nasally accent. And during that time in America, people were really like not in a good place. And we were coming out of this time period in the 90s where everything
Mm.
felt really good. And we were like, oh, don't worry, we've solved all the bigotry. And then in the 2000s, we really had to reckon with some of the things that we hadn't fixed and in the ways that, things weren't perfect. And I think a lot of people were getting that out through the media they saw, because also comedies at the time were like raunchier than ever.
Mm.
And like, you look back on them and you go, oh, that sort of didn't age well. Um, but I think like a lot of the media we were consuming at the time now, people refer to it as like edgelord stuff. And that is also not a particularly positive label, and that's okay. Um, but I do think like there was something going on at that time that really lumped all this together. And I wonder if it was like cathartic at the time, and now people, if they don't feel like they need it, they don't admit to having liked it at the time. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's likely. I think there's a bit of a hipstery element for there. Like I thought,
Yeah.
these films like can't just consistently be so successful, and they were huge at the time. Unless some of the people that were watching at the time are denying they liked it.
Yeah.
I can't get with that, me. Yeah. I
And
mean,
it's okay for taste to change, but it's also okay to admit that your taste changed.
yeah. And like, I think it came as like quite an interesting time. We're sort of talking about the world there, but if we look at horror, we've come back off the sort of post-Scream movement when everything was glossy and had like someone from Dawson's
Yes.
Creek in it, so they couldn't do nudity or violence or whatever. And so I think there was a bit of reaction to that, but also the horror audience. Like when Scream came out, I went to see it in cinemas underage. I was 16. By the time Texas Chainsaw Massacre comes out, I'm 23. I'm not in high school anymore. Like I've had a job for several years. I've been old enough to buy whatever films I want. I'm not sneaking into things underage. So I've like dived into it and I've seen a lot more horror. And
Mhm.
the tail end of the 90s slasher movies, when everything's so toned down, wasn't doing the thing for me. So to see something like really popping in cinemas, that was big.
Yeah, I definitely think that played a part. Horror is always reacting to not
Mm.
only what's going on at the time, but what came before it. And like you said, there was that cycle in the 90s of the teen slashers that all kind of looked the same. And don't get me wrong, I also love those. I just kind of love
Mm.
everything. Um, but people get tired of seeing the same thing all the time. And what could be more different from, I know what you did last summer than Saw 6,
Mm.
like there was just a huge gulf there where people were ready for something different.
Mm.
And I think we're getting to that place again. It's not going to look the same, but like, for quite a while, we've been doing really like highbrow A24, Bob Duke, sad, familial horror, which I also like. But now we're kind of like, I feel like people are tired of being sad all the time. And I think we're ready to
Mm.
get a little bit silly again. And so I think horror is going to kind of like take the shackles off and get a little bit wild again. I think that's where we're going. But I think, the torture porn era was absolutely a reaction to the toned down slashers of the late 90s.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right with the idea that that it's sort of coming back to that now, because
Mhm.
I think particularly with COVID, like we had a lot of people getting really introspective. A lot of the filmmakers getting really introspective. So
Mhm.
we've had like a lot of introspective things and like things that were shot in lockdown, so it's small casts and all this kind of thing. And there's been a lot of that at the festivals, and
Mhm.
like one of my favorites from this year is Candyland, because I've seen so much introspective shit this year just to see something that's fucking nasty, fucking rocked.
I need to see that. I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Bishop, one of the ghouls, was talking it up, and I know I'm gonna love it. But yeah, I
Mm.
haven't found it yet.
Yeah, and I think like Terrifier 2's what should we call it, a pretty good illustration, and the success of it from its origins.
Seriously, Terrifier 2 is a great example. What's it made, like some ridiculous number at the box office, and it like keeps going up and up and up. And Mike Flanagan called it a mega slasher. I think that's kind of fun.
Mm.
It's a slasher, but it's really different than like the 90s slashers. It's very gory, but the gore's kind of cartoony. It's a little bit silly, but it's also really grim. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Something I hear happens sometimes is when people want to dismiss a gory movie they don't like, they call it torture porn. And
Yeah.
so for people who haven't liked Terrifier 2, I've heard some people saying, oh yeah, this is torture porn. And I'm like, well, actually it's not. It doesn't have anything in common with this time period that we're talking about, but it is really gory. So like, but it's not technically torture porn. Like, I don't think we can just lump all gory things together and call them torture porn.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, even like a lot of the films that did get lumped together, like they seem to be lumped together like more for aesthetics than like what was actually happening in the film. I mean, like you you couldn't really like if you were from a narrative point of view, you couldn't really compare the likes of Saw to the likes of Hostel.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And I have my Saw shirt on today because we all know I'm a huge Saw fan. And I think the first one's not torture porn, but it is a part of a franchise that certainly becomes that. And I love all the Saw movies, even if they're not
Mm,
good, I love them. But
same.
you're absolutely right. Like the content, the story behind Hostel is kids go on vacation and they're like trafficked and hunted and people paid to kill them versus, and like that's huge, that has like global implications, it has really grim implications about like what you can do when you have money, to what's going on in the background of Saul, which is a guy in some city who is like, I'm going to impose my lessons on everybody else and trapping individuals. Horrible in a different way, but certainly not the same things to say about like money and global impact or like being a clueless American kid on vacation. But they do get lumped together because at the time, like a lot of the filmmaking had this really gritty aesthetic to it, and like a lot of green and
Mm.
yellow filters and a lot of like really really overdone violence in a way that I enjoy a lot, but it really was over the top. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I never really thought about that before, but the thing that puts it in the subgenre is the way it looks, not necessarily the thing it's about.
Yeah, that's it. And like that again goes back to torture porn being a term coined by people who don't really understand what they're into it. They're trying to dismiss something, isn't it? But
Hmm.
should we go back and sort of look at what sort of the sort of origins of torture porn like? I mean, like what do you think of some of the like sort of early examples? Because I think
Hmm.
like maybe things like Strangeland, D. Snyder's film, and things like that are the first sort of like proto torture porns.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I've been thinking about the Final Destination franchise a lot because I
Mm.
recently podcasted about it. Um, and I don't think Final Destination is torture porn. It has a glossy, slick look like a slasher, but it's sort of like primed audiences for torture porn, I think,
Mm.
because the deaths are really awful and kind of Rube Goldberg like perpetual motion machines that end up killing people and like crazy traps that sort of ended up happening later in Saw. A lot of that you can kind of see the beginnings of in Final Destination. And so I wonder, like, without the success of Final Destination and people kind of going, oh, I do want to go see kills, like what torture porn, like would that have been as successful? Um, I think Cabin Fever is a big one. What's that? The year
Mm.
2000, I think. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and Joyride, I technically think is also called Roadkill. I think that's a
Hmm.
slasher as well, but it also
Yeah.
had some of the like really gritty, nihilistic sort of darkness behind it that I think readied people for torture porn, as well as Wrong Turn, which
Hmm.
again I think is a slasher and obviously owes a lot to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is either a slasher or folk horror, depending on who you ask. But Wrong Turn is so brutal that I think it again sort of set up the rest of the decade. So there's all these pieces that I think were falling into place that weren't like necessarily torture porn on their own, but when they got assembled together later in movies, that's when it sort of became something. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like it's it's kind of a perfect storm of the way people were feeling in the world. The fact that
Hmm.
people that came up on the teen slashers weren't teenagers anymore, and the fact that people and like this is it's sort of like around people having DVD players in their house
Hmm.
and like so I think that did another boom in sort of collectors and it was I remember it was around that time that it was getting a lot easier to access like foreign films and stuff. Like we had the Tartan Asia Extreme
Hmm.
sort of thing coming up, so we were seeing like a lot of different stuff from that, and I think it was Tartan that released like
Yeah.
High Tension and all this kind of thing. So like we're seeing like nastier stuff in general, but yeah, like the Wrong Turn's like a very interesting one. Like, because that one didn't have any Dawson's Creek people in it, and
Right.
like that seemed to be going back to what like to like the grisliness of slashers.
Hmm.
Like, I'm a big
Yes.
fan of the Wrong Turn series,
Oh, me
apart
too.
from the remake.
I liked the remake. It
Yeah,
doesn't feel like a Wrong Turn movie to me. Like
yeah,
it could have been its own thing. But I liked it on its own. I think what Wrong Turn 3 is like the worst movie I've ever seen, I think. I do not like
mm,
that movie, but the
yeah,
fourth one makes up for it.
yeah, and is it yeah, that's Bloody Beginnings in it, and
Yeah.
the fifth one's the one which is basically like Assault on Precinct 13 with like Doug Bradley playing Hannibal Lecter.
Oh man, I need to rewatch that. It's been so long. I have the back like a Blu-ray set of them. I should
Yeah.
rewatch them. When you were mentioning this kind of being around the same time as like people having DVD players in their home, I think that's a really good point. Um, it also, I mean, we should say was around the boom of like people having internet in their
That's
homes.
very true.
And so not only could you play these movies in your house, you also could find them. And especially if you like couldn't walk into your local Best Buy or whatever and find these DVDs, you could find them online and then play them in your home. It was like suddenly we had access to so much more. Um, and I think the violence in the world also did a number to desensitize us at the time to make violence on screen need to be a little bit more rough to get our attention, because this is also when we were seeing like beheadings on the
Yeah.
news and you could like quickly go to yeah, not YouTube at the time, but like you could go online and find really dark videos of things. Like the internet in the early days was like the Wild West. Kids these days do not
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The rotten.com era, the
Yes.
fugly.com era, like at this time, like we were seeing some fucked up shit, like
Hmm.
flipping like this is a point at which your average like young person, like for the first time ever, had seen a lot of actual deaths.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like like horror movies are going to have to step up to compete with that. And like you say, like you could find things online, and significantly in the UK, because we're coming off the back of like like in the 90s and the start of the 2000s, we were still dealing with the fallout of the video nasties thing, and
Hmm.
like a lot of our stuff was still heavily cut, like, and I think what we call it? See, like it was like the early 2000s. We got like Texas Chainsaw on home media for the first time.
Wow, in the early 2000s?
Yeah,
I didn't realize it had gone on that long.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember like the first time I saw it was in the cinema, like because it hadn't got like the actual. If you have a listen to the Video Nasties episode I did with Stowaway,
Hmm.
we talk a lot about that, about how we used to have to get round things. We had to get into tape trading, uh and you'd get like a fifth generation bootleg of zombie flesh eaters or whatever.
Yeah. And it's all gritty and distorted. It's almost like the torture porn films were trying to give you that feeling a little bit. And I never was able to, like, I never got into the tape trading and that. I never was like cool enough to be doing bootlegs and things. But I have heard people describe it, and I do feel like some of the torture porn movies of the 2000s, like the way like the camera's really shaky and the filters are all discolored and
Mm.
weird. Like maybe it's trying to give you that video nasty feeling and trying to reach back for that. I don't know.
That's certainly possible because, like, we're getting directors that are very influenced by like both the VHS horror era
Hmm.
and the because like the people making horror movies in the 90s, the people who are still making them since the 80s. But this is the first time we get the wave of filmmakers that are influenced by the
Oh,
filmmakers of the
absolutely.
80s and the 70s, like particularly Rob Zombie
Hmm.
and
And
yeah,
Eli Roth, like they're
mm,
really vocal about their influences.
yeah, and we see their influences like because in Hostel. Like, I think it was when he was like, he decided he wanted to make a film like Hostel when he was doing the film festivals with Cabin Fever. It's the
Hmm.
same time that Takahashi Miike is doing the film festivals with Audition. And he
Hmm.
sees that and he's like, wow, I want to make a film like this. This is incredible. There's nothing like this.
Yes.
And so he's in the film.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. Like there's not really anything else like torture porn. Like the movies that sort of get categorized in that subgenre are not very similar to anything else. And so they really did hit on something unique when they started making films that way. At least I can't think of anything that they're super similar to. I mean, when you think of extreme cinema, it goes so much further. It's really
Mm.
something different than torture porn. It's a whole different subgenre.
Yeah, it's good. Like I think with extreme cinema, like obviously, like extreme cinema is a really, really wide church.
Yeah.
Probably not appropriate to call it a church, but it is about being as transgressive as possible,
Mhm.
and like it is about like trying to touch those emotions. Be it
Yes.
it's something super grimy and so real, like August Underground,
Hmm.
or something just comedically ridiculously offensive, like Serbian Film. Whereas, like, the key thing of like the torture porn films is like they're not doing anything like intellectual like that, or like trying to affect the viewer in that way. They are trying to make a horror film that you watch in the cinema and it fucking rocks.
Yep. Yep. And I mean, you can still pull things out of those films.
Mm,
I've written a lot about the Saw franchise, and I've been
mm,
on other podcasts talking about like the philosophies of Jigsaw. So yeah, like I can dig through it when I've rewatched those movies however
mm.
many times. But that wasn't the goal, especially with the later Saw films, and it certainly wasn't the goal of other films in that era. They really just wanted to like get butts and seats in the theater, make their money, get you coming back for more. Um, I think there was also a big remake boom happening at the time,
Mm.
and so a lot of those filmmakers who liked the originals wanted to make their own version and make a really scuzzy remake, and so there was that going on too.
Mm.
But yeah, it was not about like, oh, let's make the audience think.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Like, and like I do feel that's possibly where some of the cynical attitudes towards it come from, because some people just can't get on board with the fact that sometimes a film can just rock, sometimes a
Yeah.
film can just be banging.
Yes, that's allowed. If you
Yeah.
don't know, it's okay to just enjoy violence on screen in a fictional setting. It's okay to just enjoy that. Like, um, I will pop on Hostel 2 or the Saw films or The Collector just as background, and those are my comfort movies. And like that's okay. I'm allowed that. Um I was thinking about too when we were also mentioning extreme cinema a minute ago. I think another reason torture porn kind of falls into this crack where it's can be disrespected
Mm.
by horror fans is because like it's not highbrow enough to be lumped in with like the quote unquote
Mm.
elevated horror crowd, but it's not extreme enough to be lumped in with the extreme conversations, which are really important in their own right. But it's this kind of middle ground where it's like you're not invited to either conversation, so torture porn just kind of gets left in the middle. That's what I think about it too. Like it's not extreme enough to be extreme.
Yeah, I think, but the commercial success of it is also a thing because like
Mhm.
that means that that a lot more people come across it. Like I
Yeah.
think like there's I'm speaking like in terms of people who sort of write about extreme horror and like do podcasts. I will admit, like I've in a few groups I've seen a few weirdos, but generally, like the thing is with extreme horror is you have to go out and find it and specifically look for it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Where,
true.
yeah, whereas like my mum's seen a few Saw films, like.
Exactly. Man, that's such a good point. I never really thought about that. But that's very true. You don't have to work that hard to seek out what is called torture porn, whereas you have to work harder to seek out things more extreme than that. So, maybe it's like more normies have seen torture porn films, which is why there's like more negative attitudes about them out there, just because more people have seen them.
Yeah, that's it. It has like sort of they're getting like reviews on like I don't know if Siskel and Ebert was still around and if it was just the website by then, and and like they get played on TV.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Like you could see them on cable before streaming took off. Like that's
mm,
another thing that's interesting about this time period is um streaming didn't exist in the early 2000s, at least not in the ubiquitous way that it does now where
mm,
everybody's subscribed to multiple streaming services. Netflix existed, but it was like you got DVDs in the mail.
yeah.
So you still were reliant on like cable or channels like HBO to find these movies, and they would play them, but you had to work a little bit harder to then, like you said, extreme cinema to find them, but they were out there.
Yeah, this is it. And with the like, and it might have been what should we call it? So that might have been the last era of like people coming across films they weren't expecting.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
because it was actually scheduled. I mean, nowadays, like every streaming service will have a recommendation algorithm. So if you like if you're into what should we call it, romantic comedies,
Sure.
and you open Netflix, you watch a couple, you set up a Netflix account, you watch a couple of romantic comedies, and that's all you'll get recommended. You'll never see the horror section
That's
unless you go
true.
looking for it.
That's a really good point too. Yeah, like in the days of movies on TV,
Mm,
you would flip by them and be like, "Oh, what am I watching?" And you'd kind of either decide to stay or not. And that's not really something that happens now. I mean, I feel like Netflix kind of tried to do that with their like random shuffle play
mm,
something, but all they really do is push their originals on you with that. It's not actually
yeah.
random, so it's not quite the same.
Yeah, it's weird, like how, like, between films and music, the streaming boom has had the complete opposite effect. Because, like, it used to be
Yeah.
back in the day, people would be a purist about the genre of music they were into. Because you only had so much money to buy CDs with. You'd buy one album and listen to it to death. Because you wouldn't spend money. You wouldn't really take a chance on like buying something you didn't know. You'd like stick to the kind of things you liked. And then the streaming boom sort of happens. And now, like young people, they listen to every type of music. Like they're into flipping hyper pop, they're into death metal, they're into trap, they're into dubstep,
Mhm.
they're into like some country music. like flipping the taste is just so widespread. But whereas with film streaming services, it's done the opposite, and people are just getting fed a constant stream of like the content that they decided they like early on.
That's a really good point. I never thought about that. Why do you think that is? Is that just the way the algorithms are set up?
I think so. Like, mind you, I suppose it is different in that, like, you can listen to what should we call it, 23-minute songs in an hour, and you can watch half of a
Yeah,
film.
that's true.
It's more of a commitment like that, and like, but like so some of the what should we call it, streaming service algorithms, I would be interested in like finding out how they work, because when you look at something with like probably the biggest selection of films is on Tubi.
Yeah.
And if you watch a few really niche things in that, your recommended section is wild. You find like films of that genre that you didn't know existed.
That's
And
got
there's
to be someone's job, right? I mean, probably not. It's probably a robot. But like, think about being the person who's like setting up the algorithm, like, oh, if you watch this, you should watch these. You'd have to know so much stuff. That'd be kind of fun.
yeah, I think I might have it in the case of Netflix, because ultimately they are kind of pushing you to their originals.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they want to do. And I like some Netflix originals, but like that's where they want you and they just try to force those on you. So, yeah, even different streaming services have different ways of approaching your tastes. But that's a really good point about music streaming. I never thought about that. It is the opposite effect.
Yeah, I mean, like flipping, I remember like probably around the time of what you call it, the early torture porn stuff. If you'd speak to someone and say what kind of music would you were you into, people would normally answer with a genre.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. That made me think of new metal because that
Mm,
was kind of going on at the time of torture porn too, at least in my sphere, in my awareness, new metal was big. And there's like some similarities between like the way new metal music videos were shot and the way some
mm,
torture porn films are shot, or certain scenes in them are. Oh, new metal. What a specific time capsule that
mm.
is.
Oh, I follow this what you call it account on Twitter called Crazy Moments in New Metal History.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I should check that out.
it's a good follow. It's an entertaining account. Like, sometimes it'll play some old stuff. Like, I mean, this is the thing. Like flipping, like I went through a new metal denial phase. Like, but like I was definitely like into a lot of it at the time.
Yeah, we
And
all were. Of course we were.
yeah, I think I got a bit too pretentious to listen to it, and I've been coming back to like some old stuff like Corn and Cold Chamber and stuff. I was like, nah, this actually is pretty banging.
There's actually very good new metal, and you're much more knowledgeable about music than me. Like, I'm sure I could not go to toe with you on music, but like there's some very good new metal that I still respect. And it's interesting that Linkin Park gets lumped in there too, but Linkin Park's amazing.
Mm. Like, I do think you're right. I think if you're going to really talk about that period in history, I think like torture porn and new metal have to be spoke about together.
They do. Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, they go hand in hand. It was the same sort of like angry but sad but hopeless but also gonna try, like, you're hanging on for something but you're just pissed. Like that was in new metal
Mm.
and it was in torture porn.
Yeah, and like a lot of the videos were like quite horror influenced, but they were influenced by the horror of the 70s and 80s rather than the current horror. And then
Right.
like those music videos probably went on to influence the style of it's definitely a cyclical thing. Like, I mean, obviously Rob Zombie's a very obvious example,
Hmm.
like
Yeah. And the decades, it continued to build on itself. Like you can see the way certain trends, just like the kills got nastier, the plots got thinner, the themes got more extreme, like as the decade goes on,
mm,
and it built to this crescendo. And I sort of clock its end at the Babadook. It might have been earlier.
mm,
Um, Also, The Conjuring was around that same time too, and I
yeah.
think then we got more ghost ghostly horror after that. There's a movie from 2009, A Haunting in Connecticut, that is like half torture porn influence, but like also half kind of telling you what the Conjuring era was going to be. And I think that's a really interesting film as we're like kind of getting out of the decade there.
Yeah. Well, what do you think about Rob Zombie? This is like we mentioned him a few
Yeah.
times. Like I thought we could get into it a bit here. Like,
Yeah. I tend to like his films. I mean, not
yeah,
all of them. I
yeah,
love House of a Thousand Corpses. That's my favorite.
mine too.
I know a lot of people prefer Devil's Rejects, but House of a Thousand Corpses is just so out there. It kind of feels like to me he put all the stuff in it that he wanted to because he felt like
Yeah,
he would never make another movie again. So he just kind of like threw everything in there and it's a little bit of a mess, but I love it. Um, I like his Halloween films. Um, Lords of Salem is okay. I didn't like 31. I really wanted to like it, and I
mm,
just didn't think it was very good. But overall, I'm a fan.
yeah. For House of a Thousand Corpses, what wasn't the origin for that? That like Universal asked him to design a ride for like their theme park,
I
like
think so.
like a ghost haunt. And like they were so impressed with what he turned in, they asked him to do a film. So he just submitted the Ghost Haunt again. Uh,
Yeah. Well, and then we all know it sat in production hell before it
yeah,
eventually got picked up. And I wonder how close it is to his original vision. But I think that movie's really something
yeah.
special. And I think it's kind of timeless. Like, it's endlessly rewatchable. It's obviously influenced by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is also timeless. And I just don't think House of a Thousand Corpses will ever be like unwatchable to me.
Oh yeah, it's such an entertaining film.
Hmm.
Like I think Rob Zombie's a good director and like not so good as a writer.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah, I also think flipping. I think like Cheryl Moon Zombie gets so much hate online, and I don't think a lot of it's fair
I agree
because
with you.
because like people say like for one thing like she's not playing fucking Devil Wears Prada like I'm
Yeah.
like she's dealing with the script she's dealing with, and like Rob Zombie's dialogue isn't the best and all this, and also I'm 100% convinced she delivered the performance the director asked for.
Yeah. I like the thing is she plays characters that are very strange.
Mm,
And but like I think she's a good actress. Like the performances she delivers are convincing for the wild out there characters that she plays. And just because she's married to the director, I don't think that means she should get any extra hate, Like there are plenty of families and couples over time that have worked together or even just friends who work on films together all the time that don't
mm,
get that level of hate. And I don't know who she is as a person, maybe she sucks, but I'm like I think she's just a fine actress for these movies.
yeah, I see loads worse all the time, but they're not that kind of status, that kind of a face like that. It comes back down
Right.
to the same thing why all the hate is directed at your Eli Roths and your Rob Zombies. I don't want to speak for these people. I don't know what they're actually like, but
Exactly.
but I do feel like the people I see directing hate towards them aren't directing them to people who don't act like I never really saw that hate directed at like James Wan and Lee Winnell, but like your
Right.
average person doesn't really know what they look like. They know what Eli Roth looks like.
Yeah. No, that's true. And like I know Eli Roth has said some awful stuff and like inexcusable things. And at the same time, like both things can be true. He's a
Mm,
really knowledgeable horror historian. Like he knows tons about the history of horror and he applies that in the films that he makes. And I just because we maybe don't like some things he's done or said doesn't necessarily mean that like he doesn't know a lot about horror and that like his horror filmmaking should be lesser for it.
yeah, this is like I hear a lot of people criticizing Hostel because of the characters, like, But I'd been in Amsterdam drinking with young American tourists, and those characters are spot on. They're like that. Like, he's accurately depicting something there.
I can
They,
believe that.
yeah.
I don't
I
like
do.
Hostel very much. I really like the last act a lot. I think
Mm,
most of the movie is like trying to build tension and it doesn't really work for me. And then the last act is exactly what I want. It like gives me all
mm,
the torture and violence. Whereas Hostel 2 I absolutely
yeah.
adore because I think it gives you that from the start.
Yeah. Hostel 2 is my favorite and all.
Oh, it's so good.
Like, it does a lot in it. And again with like the references, like early on, we've got, I don't know how to pronounce the name. Edwiga Fenech, the Giallo actress.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
I also don't know how to pronounce it.
yeah, I like references like that. I thought like Hostel 2 was a really good follow up. Like, and
Mhm.
I tend to watch, like, I watched Hostel today, but normally if I'm just going to put one on, it'll be Hostel 2. But I do think they like work a lot better as like a two-parter.
Yeah, I agree. I like the first movie more because I know what I'm going to get in the second movie, you know?
Mm.
Um, Without the second movie, I don't like the first as much. And then the third one, we just don't talk about.
Yeah.
It's not that
Well,
great.
that's what happens when you try and take when you try and take what makes torture porn work out of torture porn, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And it was
Mm.
straight to DVD, and there can be a lot of things that are really successful straight to video or straight to streaming, of course, but I don't think that movie was going to be successful straight to DVD. I I don't know if it
Yeah.
would have done well in the box office either, but you at least might have got Hostile fans going to pay to see it.
Yeah. Yeah, flipping like it was one that I like heard about, like I didn't hear about it. Like I saw it in a shop one day.
Mhm.
Not even a shop, actually. It was Love Film, which was the UK equivalent to Netflix when they were sending the discs out. I flipping saw it while I was ordering me DVDs for the week.
Yeah, I think I also just stumbled upon it one day a long time after it had come out and I was like, "Oh, there's a third one?"
Hmm.
It's you can skip it.
Yeah. So we mentioned a lot of the biggies. Like, is there any other like recommendations you want to throw in the mix for the people then?
I do. So I briefly mentioned it earlier, but I love the collector and the collection,
Mm.
and I think that they don't get enough attention. I know you and I have talked about this on Twitter before. They're written and directed by Marcus Dunstan, who was also involved in the Saw franchise. And the collector was originally pitched as a Saw prequel, but then the
Mm.
studio was like, no, let's have it be its own thing. Um, and those are just excellent examples of the things we love about torture porn. And I also, we haven't mentioned at all Wolf Creek. And
Mm.
if Wolf Creek is a part of this subgenre, then that's a big recommend for me. The second one I don't like as much. I still like it, but I adore Wolf Creek from 2005. That one's an Australian film. I'm sure
Yeah.
you know that.
I like Wolf Creek was one that I saw and like I wasn't aware of what it was like.
Hmm.
Like I said, it was, like I thought it might just be like a like a murder mystery thing. Like I thought, oh, something Australian. So like that one really did take me by surprise.
Yeah, that's brutal and nasty, and I love it. It's just exactly what it is. And so much of it is carried by the main protagonist's
Mm.
performance. I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head right now, but he's absolutely excellent and believable in that role, which makes it so scary and nasty. It's awesome.
Yeah, it kind of like flips a lot of things because normally horrors like it's about claustrophobia, it's about being trapped.
Right.
And like Wolf Creek's completely the opposite because you're dealing with the Australian outback, which is just impossibly like too wide for me to get my head around.
That's a really good point, and that's very true. Like, it's not that there's nowhere to run, it's that there's so many places to run and no one's coming to help you.
Yeah, it's the isolation of not being able to get anywhere, like, and that's something that they're caught off guard by when they
Mhm.
initially run into it. Like Wolf Creek, It's worth mentioning, like, Lee Winnell's like an Australian guy and all, like.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that does get lost sometimes when people talk about the Saw franchise because it does eventually become very American. But Lee Winnell and James Wan are both from Australia and went to school together in Australia. They made a movie that wasn't torture porn, but later launched torture porn. And so, like, I think we also didn't mention The Loved Ones, which is also
Mm,
Australian, and I also love that film. It's so much fun. That's another Australian film. And so there's kind of this like Australian North American mix of films that influenced one another in this
mm.
subgenre.
Yeah, like the like you'd never really hear like much of a discussion about Australian horror. But when they
Yeah.
tend to do horror films out there, a lot of them tend to be really gnarly. You know,
Yeah.
things like flipping Body Melt, which had the guy out of Neighbours in, like Harold Bishop, and like that was a mad one because that was a very successful soap opera over here.
Oh, was it? I've heard of
Yeah,
it, but I've never seen an
yeah,
episode of Neighbors.
yeah. I don't think you need to, but
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Good.
I mean, like uh, like I think body horror is like quite an influence on sort of torture porn. But
Absolutely.
whereas with body horror, we think of like this abstract thing, like the fly and like people melting and all this,
Mhm.
like flipping torture porn's like the body horror of reality, like, isn't it? Like
Yes.
it.
If I smash your hand with a hammer, what does that look like? What does that sound like? How does that feel? It's actually, a lot of torture porn, like the violence in it is so brutal because it's so toned down because it is more
Mm,
realistic. It's like, I smack your head with a hammer, it doesn't explode, it just sort of cracks and bleeds. Like that's almost more horrific. Yeah, I definitely think the realism in some torture porn is what makes it, people want to look away.
this is it. Like I'll always like have a more visceral reaction to something happening to someone's fingernail than I
Oh,
will to their head being chopped off.
yes, or teeth or eyes.
Yeah.
Like those really vulnerable parts of your body where like it can hurt. I think it's because it's a familiar feeling. Like we know what it feels like to have a fingernail rip and it's terrible
Yeah.
versus I never want to know what it feels like to get my head chopped off. But like I can't really relate to
Mm.
that.
Yeah, that's it. I think like that's something that like I think the first people that really got onto it, it was the Italians really like that fingernails, teeth and eyes.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
like
Is it Zombie that has the really close up scene with the eye?
yeah.
Yeah, that's what I think of.
I think that was like the first like video I tried to find online was that eye scene because that was like cut out of like the UK VHS.
Oh yeah. Oh man, you can probably buy it now, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like around the time of like the sort of torture porn, but I can't remember the exact year. But like most of like the heavy censorship in the UK was like kind of done to like because of one guy that was in charge, a guy called James Furman, who was like put in charge of the censors, and like the government just gave him unlimited power to say what can and can't be seen.
Okay.
And it was
Yeah.
when he retired. When he retired, it was like when they let all the ghosts out in Ghostbusters. Like,
Just all the scenes that had never been
yeah,
seen and released on the world.
yeah, like if you watch the film Censor,
Hmm.
you've seen that, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's a very good depiction of the time.
Yeah.
Like the videos under the counter and like what was happening with the actual censorship and like how it's being affected by the media. That was all very it's fictionalized but very accurate. But you got to realize it did go on till like the year 2000.
I didn't realize it had gone that long. Like I know about that. I know about the video nasties,
Mm,
conceptually, but it didn't affect me, and so I didn't realize how long it
mm,
had gone. And torture porn, it had to be just the right time for it
mm.
too, because of that. Like there's all these things that came together to make it the right time for everybody to go like, yes, I want to see something gritty and nasty on screen, please.
Yeah. and it was like and it is like a great time capsule. Like, I think that's why it's important to, like, as I say, these are films that are just a lot of fun.
Yes. Yes.
But even though what you call it, like, they don't get spoke about and in the same kind of way as like extreme cinema, New French Extremity, and all these kind of movements, it is important to realize that they did come from somewhere. Like,
Yeah. I think that's very true. And you don't have to like them. You don't have to like go out tomorrow and be like, now I love torture porn movies. But they are a part of horror history and they're an important part of it. They're a huge part of it. They were reacting to something and then the next thing reacted to them. They came out of directors who were influenced by films that you might say you do love. So I think people need to, horror fans or people who want to understand the genre do need to pay more attention to torture porn, whether they like it or not.
that's true, because I mean, like, it is completely influential. Like, even in like action films nowadays, like, you have some of the stuff you can see on screen in like pretty much any film that has violence in it. It's directed for adults, is a whole other level. And like, I think you needed torture porn to get it there.
I think so too, because for like, the average viewer, maybe torture porn took it too far, but then we were able to up what we found acceptable was a little bit worse than it was before. So I do think like it pulled forward what people will accept on screen.
Yeah, definitely. Like, okay. I think we'll start wrapping up there. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really,
Yes,
really enjoyed this.
me
Talking
too.
about some of my favorite shit with someone who knows it inside out. It's some of my favorite stuff to do. So I'm really, really happy you came on and did this with us. Have you got any plugs for socials? Anything you want people to get eyes on?
Sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Ari_Hellraiser and at Letterboxd at the same name. I will post all my writing and podcasting on Twitter, but you can also find me on Ghouls Magazine, usually writing about something from this era.
Aces, that's fantastic. Okay, I've been Kinell, KSC Podcast. You know what it is. If you're watching on YouTube, give us a like and a subscribe and all that kind of thing. If you're listening, then, well, you won't see me doing this now, will you? But if you're listening, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you've got one of those, if you use what like Spotify or something that lets you do reviews, give us a review, because no one's ever given me a review. Safe. But yeah, KSC Podcast. Enjoy yourself. Safe.